Hello and welcome to Melee's Turnwheel, the series that takes a retroactive look at the Fire Emblem series chapter by chapter. I'm your host, Melee Kirby, and today we're wrapping up Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War. We've made it to the end of our first game, and before we move on to the next one, I want to take a little time to kind of debrief, talk about this game as a whole, and tie up any loose ends that I haven't really gotten to in the main episode so far. So if you're interested in that, then stick around. If not, you can expect the Thracia episode at some point in the future, probably. and so you can just tune in then if you don't feel like stuff like this will interest you. So I've actually taken a run at this a couple times, and I wasn't really sure how I wanted to structure this because it's kind of weird. We're not basing this on any sort of chapter. There's no template for us to use to kind of like organize my thoughts or anything like that. So this is going to be more kind of off the cuff than it usually is. I mean, it's already pretty off the cuff, but at least like in the main episodes, I'm going, scene by scene and kind of talking about things as they become relevant. In this, it's a little scattershot, so I'm going to try to like condense it down. I'm going to try to keep the rambling to a minimum. I know I ramble a lot, but I'm going to try to cut down on that because I'm liable to do it a lot more in a environment like this. So hopefully that doesn't become a problem. Before we get to anything else, though, I want to talk about the answers to the question that I asked you guys in the last episode. If you remember, now every episode there's going to be a question that you guys can answer by either emailing turnwheelpodcast@gmail.com or by tweeting your replies at iMainMeleeKirby on Twitter. Unfortunately, I didn't get very many replies on Twitter or via email, but that's totally fine. I wasn't expecting a huge amount of response at first, especially since the show is pretty small. Speaking of which, if you're new, welcome. I know that a few people have started listening ever since I posted on Reddit about the show, and I talked about it a little bit on Discord. So I've gotten like about a dozen people, at least tried out the podcast, which is nice. It's great to see. I hope you're enjoying it so far. I've heard pretty positive things from the people who have listened to it so far. I know it's a bit of a rough start, but if you've made it this far, I do appreciate it. So hopefully, with those boosted numbers, we might be able to get a little bit more response this time, but if not, that's fine. I got two answers over on Twitter. One of them is from @Biozilla, who said Lewin was their favorite character and kind of talked about the reasons why. They talked a lot about some of the stuff that I've said in the past too about how they're a very centralized character. They get a lot of screen time, and his character interactions were really fun. All of which I agree with. Lewin's a fantastic character. I already talked about why he's one of my favorites in this game, if not my favorite. So I wanted to kind of pad out the responses a little bit and get some more meat to talk about. So I asked some of my friends over on Discord who their favorite characters were, and I got a surprising variety in responses. I mean, there were a few that, kind of the usual suspects. I got Finn, I got Sigurd, Seliph, Lewin, those guys. But I also got some characters like Aranis, who is not a very well-defined character. Well, I shouldn't say she's not well-defined. She doesn't have a lot of screen time compared to, all those characters that I just listed off. So she doesn't have a lot of time to make an impression. So I'm glad that the person who said Aranis, they were able to get a lot out of her in the short time that she is relevant to the story. I also saw a few responses. I saw Lachesis, I saw Jamk, Layla, Altena, some of these characters. Altena is pretty important to the story. But for the most part, those are pretty uh I don't want to say obscure because other than like the five characters that I've talked about, pretty much everyone in this game is kind of the same level of obscure. But I mean, those are definitely not answers that you hear every day. So I was very interested to see that there were some people who really like those characters, and I do too. I think there's a lot to like there. I think my one of my favorite characters, probably like my third favorite behind Tinny and Lewin, is God, what's his name? He's my favorite character. I can't remember his name. Holland. I've talked in episode 2 or episode 3, chapter 2, about how much I like Holland and why I think he's a very underrated character. So I think there's something to be said for, especially in these older games, characters that don't get a lot of time to have their personalities fleshed out, and they don't have like a bunch of supports that go into detail about their backstory and stuff like that. But honestly, sometimes you don't need all that. Sometimes you just need a strong introduction that makes a good impression and someone who resonates with you enough, you know? And I think it's going to be a little bit of a shame seeing that go away I mean, it's going to be the same in Thracia, but then starting with FE6, we're going to have supports in pretty much every game starting with FE6. So there's not going to be a whole lot of those characters anymore, which is a bummer. I think generally it's a good thing that we moved away from that. So I'm not saying that I want to go back to that level of characterization, but I just think there's some charm and some novelty to that. You know what I mean? So anyway, thank you to anyone who responded to me on Twitter, or if you are listening and you responded to me on Discord. Thank you very much. I very much appreciate it. And yeah, so for this time, my question is going to be a lot more open ended because it's something that I'm curious about. I want to know, what are your guys' thoughts on Seliph and Sigurd as characters, and kind of where would they rank for you in terms of Fire Emblem protagonists? You don't have to like give a specific number, but like, are they some of your favorites? Are they your least favorites? Somewhere in the middle. What are your thoughts? Because I'm going to talk a lot about Seliph and Sigurd today, and I want to know what your guys' thoughts are because I mean, people talk about Sigurd as being one of the best protagonists in the series, and I'm curious what you guys, would you agree? Why? And Seliph kind of gets written off as being more generic. Does anyone agree with that? Disagree with that? You know. So leave your thoughts on Twitter. Again, at I'm a Melee Kirby, or email me at turnwheelpodcast@gmail.com. I will be checking those frequently. They'll also be in the episode description too, so you can just go and look them if you want. So originally, I was going to start this off by talking about, in more depth, the interview with Shozo Kaga that I mentioned way at the beginning, episode 2, I think. This time, actually, episode 2, chapter 1. I mentioned that there was a interview with Kaga that I found really interesting, and I did, and I wanted to talk more about it. But the reason I decided not to do that is because most of what is in there is stuff that's already kind of common knowledge in the fan base. And for me, it was more so interesting seeing the source of a lot of like common knowledge things that you kind of just take for granted, like details about the game that people always say, "Oh yeah, Kaga said this, Kaga said that," and I just kind of always assumed that they were telling the truth. But it was cool to see the actual interview where stuff like that comes out. There's also a couple of details in there that are funny, stuff like him acknowledging that the game is very horse centric. So if you're curious, I encourage you to go read it. I'll leave a link to it in the description, but I'm not going to talk about it here. At least not in any sort of detail. It'll come up because the first thing I want to talk about is actually something that I've teased a couple times now, and it's something that I know a lot of people in the community are perplexed by to this day, which is the quote unquote difficulty option that this game presents you with. That being, do you want the AI to be, to use their words, simple or clever? Now, difficulty is something that the series has had an interesting relationship with. Some have basically no difficulty options. I don't believe FE1 or FE3 have any difficulty options whatsoever. I could be wrong about that. I don't know those games very well. FE2 and FE5 have something called Paragon mode. We'll talk about this more when we get to Thracia, but basically that's essentially you can put in a cheat code to unlock easy mode, more or less, which is a novel idea, I guess, especially since those games are pretty fucking hard, or at least, grindy. I can definitely understand why they would want to put an easy mode in. Back then, you got to remember that, nowadays people are like, they should put hard mode in games. They should put hard mode in Pokemon. They should put hard mode in Zelda. They do put hard mode in Zelda, but you know what I mean. And without like getting into whether or not I agree with any of that, I think it's important to remember that back then, games, especially in like FE2 era, the NES, games were fucking hard. And so a lot of games didn't include a hard option because the hard option just was the game. And if you were lucky, sometimes they would include an easy option to make things a little bit easier on you. FE4 is kind of the odd one out because it is the only game in the series prior to Kaga's departure, actually, that's probably just a coincidence though, that had a kind of a hard mode option. You had the option to change the AI to either simple or clever. I believe you need to beat the game to unlock this option, although I actually don't know that for a fact. Okay. Yes, you do need to beat the game once to unlock it, I'm pretty sure. That seems to be what the general consensus is from what I can find. I can just go check, I guess, but I don't like I have already beaten the game, so the save might just it might just give me clever mode as an option anyway. I don't know. I'm pretty sure I looked in the options menu during this playthrough and it wasn't there, so I think you do need to beat the game once. Anyway, I've never really known what the fuck this option did, and whenever I see someone playing genealogy that like turns it on or like messes with it, I always hear them say like, I don't really know what this does, but it seems to do something, so I'm gonna keep it on. Well, I believe that I've figured it out. I mean, not through any sort of like testing or anything. You can find the answer pretty easily if you just look it up, but I know a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people just kind of like forget about it. So I thought it would be a fun thing to talk about here. It also ties back into the Kaga interview I was talking about. As I said, it is going to come up because in that interview he talks about how he designed the game so that characters with high leadership stars, which is a stat that commanders of armies and things have, basically that the more leadership stars a boss has, the better the AI of their sort of lackeys will be. In that interview, he actually brings out the Cross Knights as an example because Eldegon has really high leadership stars, and so their AI is really good. That's generally how it works, although I think in a lot of ways, from what I'm reading, it seems like clever mode is easier almost. Not necessarily because the enemies are like dumber, but because honestly, in a way, because they're smarter. They will always take the most optimal path to like securing victory, which means that you can predict what they're gonna do. They're not like I think maybe if I had to guess, I'd say simple mode probably has some randomness put in to give them a chance to do some dumb stuff. I should clarify. I missed this crucial detail. More leadership stars equals better AI. Clever mode AI apparently gives every enemy the AI of someone who has a 5 leader star commander or something like that. Something to that effect. So I think they're more likely to gang up on people. I think they're going to go for people who can attack them back more often. Stuff like that. Traditional Fire Emblem AI stuff, the stuff that we're accustomed to seeing more often. I don't know for sure. It's kind of like speculative still. A lot of people don't really know what it does, but that's like the best answer I could find. And in a lot of ways, I feel like this makes it easier again because it's more predictable. You know what they're gonna do because they're gonna see whatever the best option is in their coding or whatever, and they're always gonna go for it. So you can plan around that and figure stuff out. I don't know. It's interesting. Definitely a very unique way of doing AI. I don't know if this. I mean, I know clever mode AI doesn't come back in Thracia, but there are leadership stars in Thracia, and actually also Radiant Dawn. So I have to wonder if AI is ever in any other game tied to leadership stars. I'll have to look into that when we get to those games. So as far as the difficulty option goes, it's not really what the series would eventually go to. Difficulty has changed AI before. I'm pretty sure in FE12 the enemy AI will change depending on the difficulty level you're playing. But for the most part, it's pretty much all just enemies get stronger stats, and then sometimes you also get less experience, stuff like that. Pretty simple, and I can't say that it's I definitely think that way is preferable, but I have to give this game credit for coming up with a very unique difficulty option that people are still trying to figure out to this day because they're not really sure what the difference is. I think that's the big takeaway, right? Is that most people playing through the game can't even notice the difference. someone walked away from their game and you snuck on and changed their settings and made it clever mode AI and then they came back, I don't think that they would notice a difference. I think that that's really the biggest takeaway here. So take from that what you will. For me, that's an indication that maybe they needed to go back to the drawing board a little bit, make some bigger changes or something. I don't know. The other thing I wanted to talk about before we got any further is that this game is the first game in the series to introduce the ranking system, which has become something of a series staple. I don't think they have it anymore. I don't think that they put it in the newer games. I'm pretty sure the last game to have it was like FE12 probably, but it's come in and out of fashion with the series. Essentially what it is at the end of every playthrough you are ranked, given a score from, I mean, I think it varies, but usually from like D to S or C to S. Sometimes it's represented with stars, stuff like that. Basically the idea is that the better you do in certain areas, the better score you get. The areas, I believe, also change from game to game, but they're usually something like tactics, which is how many turns you take, survival, which is how many of your characters die, experience, which is how well you're able to spread out experience over your whole army, and funds, which is how well you spend your money and how well you use your resources. This is something that is significantly better documented, especially considering that it's in like every game. So we kind of know generally what the deal is. In FE4 specifically, some of the requirements are a little ridiculous. Like I think in you need to get an S rank in experience, you need to get every character to like level 25 or something like that on average. It's crazy. Only 3 characters can die the entire game and they track resets. So resets from like in like autosaves. So if someone dies, you need to reset the whole map basically if you want to maintain that S rank. Well, you can let 2 die without resetting the whole map. And then each game has like different requirements for the tactics ranks and stuff like that. So it's a pretty fun way to judge your own progress as a player. Although I think that you don't necessarily need to get high ranks to be a good Fire Emblem player. If anything, I think the better test of your skill as a Fire Emblem player is doing an Iron Man would probably be the best way. Either that or like an LTC or an LTC probably. Yeah, speed run is not like a speed run is you definitely need to be skilled to do a speed run, but like most of that I feel like comes from like the input. Routing is important, but it's also like very like you just need to be like good at inputting things fast. Whereas in LTC, you can take your time, plan things out more. It's like entirely route focused essentially. Or an Iron Man. I think an Iron Man is probably the best way to like really like if you want to improve at playing Fire Emblem, just do Iron Man runs and you'll get the hang of it pretty fast. I don't think that doing a ranked run is the right way to go about getting better at Fire Emblem because you will end up spending like 60 turns in the arena fucking grinding up characters to level 25. For what it's worth, my rank I think was like C. I think I got probably D tactics to be honest. But like C funds probably. I don't remember exactly what they were. I remember I got a C overall, which I believe is the lowest you can get. So no, I got a B, I think. I don't remember. I've never claimed to be good at Fire Emblem. In fact, I've said the opposite on numerous occasions that I'm very bad at Fire Emblem. So don't expect my rankings to be anything crazy. It's interesting too because ranked runs for a while used to be the standard for like judging how good a character was is how well they help you get like S ranks and stuff, which is really weird in today's, kind of fan based culture thinking back on because now it's usually like does this character save you turns? That seems to generally be the mindset, which is part of a ranked run is obviously tactics and getting a low turn count. But usually the tactics requirements are pretty generous, and unless you're like taking a really long time, grinding, killing all the enemies in route maps and stuff like that, you'll probably get a decent tactics rank. So it's not really the best metric of who's best at saving turns. I also think that there's a lot to be argued about, that metric of what characters save turns being flawed. The kind of the thing that people have settled on right now is a very nebulous sort of somewhat efficient playthrough. There's not a very consistent metric to judge how good characters are. Especially we don't have anything like Smogon for Fire Emblem characters, which would be really fun now that I'm thinking about it. Although it would be kind of useless since it's a single player game anyway, except for Fates, I guess. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. It's just part of the fandom that I found interesting. I was not part of the fandom around that time. I got into it with not with Awakening. Like Awakening was not my first game, but like Awakening is what brought my attention to the series. So I didn't play it until it basically got popular already. So I'm not like an expert on like the old Serenus Forest forums and stuff like that. So it's possible that stuff I'm saying is wrong, but this is just generally what I've seen and heard being talked about over the years. All right, with those two things out of the way, I think we can safely move on to our general discussion about the game. And I wanted to start with a concept that I've brought up once or twice now, I think, that has only become more and more true the more I've thought about it, the more I've you know thought about the game as a whole, and that is the concept of micro planning versus macro planning, or micro strategy versus macro strategy, whatever you want to call it. There's other words you can use too that maybe don't even include micro or macro. But basically, it's this idea, this line that I drew between two distinct types of strategy in really any strategy game, but I don't really play strategy games outside of Fire Emblem, so I'm going to talk about it more so in the context of Fire Emblem. So, micro strategy is what I use to refer to things like your turn by turn plays, or even like your overall plan for a map, right? Because there are like multiple levels to this, right? And micro can mean whatever we need it to mean for the situation. But it's basically your moment to moment decisions. You look at a map and you're like, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this. I'm going to put these items on these characters, and I'm going to send them to these specific places. And sometimes you maybe need to think on your feet a little bit. You know, one of your characters maybe gets hurt or gets crit unexpectedly, and you need to detour your healer to go fix them up. Or maybe you get jumped by some reinforcements you didn't know were coming, and now you need to get your Worm Slayer over to the other side of the map. Stuff like that. That is what I'm referring to as micro strategy, and macro strategy refers to. I mean, it's kind of hard to come up with a specific example outside of this game because basically this game is the only one that really focuses on that macro strategy. But I guess a good way to put it, especially in games like Radiant Dawn, is stuff like who are you gonna use long term, right? Like the who are you going to put investment into, why, and how are you going to do that in a way that is like safe and efficient, and who do you not bother with because they're just so bad. Or in Awakening and Fates, like who am I gonna pair to get what kids? Again, we'll come back to that for this game. But then also in Three Houses actually has a big emphasis on this as well, with the class line system. Like what classes am I going to put my characters into, and what skills do they need to practice in and be tutored in for them to get into that class line. Long term strategy is basically what I am thinking of this as. And you can also think of things like, should I use my killing edge now, or should I save it for when I need to kill a tough boss later? Should I use my speed wings now, or is there a character who I would like to give more speed to later down the line? Generally, thinking ahead and thinking towards the future. This game, I believe, is truly unique in the Fire Emblem franchise for being the only game that I can think of that really is entirely based around macro planning. And obviously there is some micro planning, that's it's not like you never have to strategize in the moment, but it's a lot less emphasized than in other games. Because in other games, you do have to think about unit placement, you do have to think about what characters are going where. In this game, really most of your characters are going to be in the same general area anyway most of the time. You almost never have to split your army up. And even when you do, you have a couple. I mean, I guess this is true of every game, but you have a couple of juggernauts that can just solo entire squads of enemies. There's almost never any effective weaponry. Like I don't think really. Do horse slayers even exist in this game? Yeah, they do. They do, but you don't usually get them used against you. So, and you notice that I'm using distinct word choice here. I said that it is unique. That is my kind way of saying that I basically don't like this at all. There's kind of a meme in the Fire Emblem community. I guess maybe a meme is the wrong word, but it's kind of like a common saying or a common thought that Fire Emblem 4 is a lot more interesting to plan out than it is to actually play, which I think is true. I would agree with that statement. And I think that this is the reason why. I mean, I think that this game is so focused on having you think, okay, where are my items going to end up long term? Who are my characters going to get married to? What are their kids going to be like? What items am I going to pass down onto them? Do I have enough gold? Should I use this gold now or should I save it for later? That is the entire game. And then when you're actually in the maps playing them, it's like, okay, well now Sigurd's gonna kill all these enemies, and Quan's gonna kill all these enemies, and Lewin's gonna kill all these enemies, and then the map's over. The actual moment to moment strategy is again not non-existent. I'm not giving I wouldn't be giving the game enough credit to say that it never happens. There are instances like I've said chapter 9 is a good instance of this, chapter 7, chapter 3 has a couple, but it's much much less common than the other games in the franchise. Not to say that the other games in the franchise don't have this. Again, I mentioned small instances of it in every game, but then especially in Awakening, Fates, and then Three Houses, they have entire systems in them to encourage macro planning. But the emphasis in those games are much more on moment to moment decisions that you're making about who to place where, what items to use, um, in what parts of the map, etc., etc. And I respect this game a lot for taking that different approach to strategy. And I would never say that just because something is different and maybe didn't work out 100% means that it was bad. I think that there's a lot to be said for a game that tries something new and different and doesn't necessarily succeed entirely, but the fact that they really took a go at it and I mean I think all things considered could have been a lot worse. It's still a pretty fun game. It's a lot of people's favorite game in the series. I think maybe just because it has like a better story to lean back on. I guess the best way I can put it is if this game had a bad story, would anyone even care about it? Like would anyone really like Genealogy if the story was as mediocre as something like Fates or Awakening? I don't know. I'm inclined to think no. Whereas, games, maybe this is a bit of a hot take. I don't think that Fire Emblem 6 or 7 have particularly great stories. I don't think they're bad. I just think that they're not anything super special or anything to write home about. But people still enjoy playing those games. So there must be something there. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people would really like this game if the story was bad, but I never hear anyone talk about, man, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not giving the game enough credit. Maybe people would like it even if the story was bad. I'm not sure, to be honest. But that's just my inclination is that it probably would not be as well regarded, not nearly as well regarded. So all of this is really to say that I enjoy the gameplay mechanics of Fire Emblem 4 a lot, and I think that people who have played this game or who have like maybe tried this game and bounced off of it or have not even given it a chance because they see that the mechanics are weird and they think, oh, well, this is daunting, I don't really want to get involved with this. I think that those people should really give this game a chance because it will almost certainly surprise you. I know it surprised me. I didn't want to play it at first either. I thought it was really weird. I didn't like anything that I was hearing about it. Like the inventory management system was weird and wonky, and the huge maps were daunting for sure. But I tried it, and I think that I got a really great experience out of it. So if you somehow made it all the way to the end of this game, and you have decided to not play it yourself, but only listen to me talk about it, I'd reconsider that. I'd definitely go back and try it again because you might be surprised how much you enjoy that macro aspect of strategy that you're usually not even thinking about in most games because it's not a focus in most games. However, I definitely think that as a series trend, I don't think I would like to see this sort of style of game come back. I definitely prefer it when the games are more focused on micro strategy, or honestly, the best of both worlds is when they're kind of a mix of both. I think Three Houses is a great example of this. Not to say that Three Houses isn't flawed; it absolutely is. But in terms of even in terms of gameplay, it's flawed. I think the map design is pretty bad in that game. But in terms of what I'm talking about here with the micro and macro spectrum kind of strategy, they really fit a nice middle ground where you are thinking about things on the fly and moment to moment, but you're also planning things out long term. You ever say a word so much that it loses all meaning to you? That's what's happening with me right now with micro and macro. So I'm gonna move on from this topic. I think you guys get my point. It's a great game in terms of gameplay, but I don't necessarily agree with the direction it took and would not necessarily like to see it come back. The other thing in terms of gameplay I want to talk about is the map design, only to basically briefly say that this game has really bad maps. I've kind of gone back and forth on what maps I think are the best in this game. I said it ended up being Chapter 3, and I said pretty early on that it was going to be Chapter 3, like I knew Chapter 3 was going to be my favorite going in. And there were a few maps that managed to surprise me. I think Chapter 7 was another one that I enjoyed. Chapter 9 caught me by surprise. I think even Chapter 8 and Chapter 6, most of the Gen 2 maps, again, I don't know why that's an unpopular opinion. I think people prefer Gen 1 maps in general. I don't really get it. But for me, most of the Gen 2 maps were pretty good by this game standards, which is to say not that good. I even mentioned this in my episode 4, Chapter 3 episode, that yes, Chapter 3 is my favorite map in the game, but it is not one of my favorite maps in the series. It's just really the best of a bad lot. Not even to say that all the maps are bad, just that some of them are bad. Some of them are very, very bad, but most of them are just forgettable and completely bland slogs through forgettable environments, doing forgettable things. And I think this really ties back in with the, oh God, I have to say it again, don't I? The micro and macro thing I was talking about earlier, because I think that part of what makes a good map is how much does it test your micro strategy? Are you able to, or does it require you to plan out, a strategy of attack and think on your feet, et cetera, all the same things I've been saying, and this game almost never does that, and Chapter 3 is the best probably because it makes you do that the most. It has you split up at the beginning to defend your castle, and then at the end it has Tiltu and Claude and Brigid kind of off on their own. That's a place where you have to do some micro strategy for sure. So yeah, you can definitely see how all of these things kind of tie into each other. I mean, just think of your favorite maps from the series, think about why you like those maps, and it probably has something to do with it causing you to have to come up with fun, interesting strategies. Because that's what Fire Emblem is all about, right? So I think that you guys are getting what I'm trying to say here. The game has basically no micro strategy requirements whatsoever, and so the maps suffer as a result. That's the long and short of it. And I'm hoping that that will change as the games go on. I know that, I mean, as I've said, this is really the only game that has this problem. I guess if you want to, it's not really the only game that has this problem. It's the only game that puts macro over micro. If you want to talk about a game that doesn't have either, we can talk about Awakening, but that's for a different day. I guess Awakening does have kind of the macro stuff with the children, but I don't know. It's not nearly as emphasized as it is in this game, in my opinion. So with that out of the way, we can talk about the thing that everybody loves about this game, that everyone always talks about in reference to this game, and that is, of course, the story. Now, if you've been listening to the podcast every episode up to this point, you probably already have a generally good idea of what I'm going to talk about. And if you haven't been, for whatever reason, you just decided to skip straight to this episode. I don't know why you would do that. But if you haven't been listening, then you might be a little bit surprised to find out that I take a lot of issue with this game's story in a lot of places. I want to make this clear right off the bat before I get too deep in the weeds here. I think it's a game with a good story. I like the story overall. I still do think it's a series highlight in terms of this stuff, but I was surprised by just how much I found to criticize in this game. And I have to wonder if this is going to be the same for every game, because if this game is regarded as one of the best stories in the series, and yet I found so much to point out and to take issue with, is every story in the series just going to be bad? I mean, like I don't think that this series is super well known for its narratives. I think that there are a few standout games, and this is one of them for sure. But I've always kind of thought of most of the stories in the series as just being kind of forgettable or milk toast, not necessarily bad. Again, like a good example being FE6. I think FE6 has a very bog standard story that is told reasonably well and doesn't occupy too much space, but is a fun excuse to get through the game. It doesn't try to be anything more than it is, and that's fine. But am I gonna go back to FE6 and I'm gonna be like, well, this doesn't make any sense. This doesn't make any sense. This is bullshit. I don't like this at all. Because that's kind of what I did for this game, and apparently it just gets worse from here. So I don't know. I'll be curious to see that. Now, as for what it is about this game's story I specifically don't like, well, as I've said, you kind of already know the answer if you've been listening to the podcast this entire time. But I'm going to try to condense all my thoughts down to make them easier to explain in a succinct manner. Basically, I have really three, no, not really. I have basically one big issue that a lot of other smaller issues tie into. This game is a bad mystery story. And there are two distinct ways in which it fails as a mystery story. The first is that in some ways it's not trying to be a mystery story at all, which is not inherently a bad thing. I'm not saying that I want every story to be a mystery. I think that most stories can benefit from having mystery elements. And by mystery elements, I really just mean details that are left ambiguous to both the characters and the audience so that they can be used as reveals later on to recontextualize old information. That's not even really like a mystery story thing. That's just like a storytelling trope that like just kind of is more associated with the mystery genre. But really all I mean is that like there needs to be information that is withheld from you and revealed at points where it is most interesting. The audience and even the characters should be left with questions that are not immediately answered so that they have time to think about them, to speculate, maybe come to their own conclusions that may be correct or may be wrong or maybe partially correct. But it's also important to not just reveal it all at once, like to withhold everything and then reveal it all at the same time. It should be doled out like little by little throughout the story. This is kind of just how I generally like my stories to be. If you think differently, if you think that this is lame and dumb and overdone, that's totally fine. My main thought process on that is that it's overdone for a reason because it works and is very effective most of the time when it's done well. So that's how I feel about it. Now, if the game was just completely disinterested in having any mystery elements whatsoever, that would be one thing. There are some stories that just reveal everything up front, and that could be, I mean, this game doesn't do anything interesting with that information, but you can do something with the information, especially if it's something that the audience knows but the characters don't. That can be interesting. You can do stuff with that. Again, this game doesn't really. But the main problem that I have is that this game does have mystery elements to it. It keeps information from you. It just does it badly. It's both all withheld and then revealed all at the end, and then most of it doesn't even like recontextualize anything in the story at all. What I'm referring to is the Darna and Holy Blood stuff. And this is something I've complained about in the past, how the game never properly explains to you until the very, very, very end how Holy Blood works. What is Holy Blood? Where does it come from? What happened at Darna? Why is it important? Who is affected by it? How it is still affecting the world today, basically. The game doesn't explain any of that, which can work, except the game doesn't really try to do anything interesting with that. It just reveals it all to you at the end, and not in a way that's like, oh, so now this makes more sense, or that makes more sense, and now I'm seeing this certain thing in a new light. It doesn't do any of that. It just is a big exposition dump at the very end of the story. Meanwhile, the actually potentially interesting mysteries that would recontextualize previous events if critical information was kept from you are things like what's going on with Deirdre? Who is she? Why is she important? Why are they hunting her? Who is Arvis? What are his thoughts and feelings on the whole situation? That part is kind of left ambiguous, but like, is Arvis a villain? Does he know what's going on? To what extent is he being tricked by Reptor and Langbolt versus how much is he tricking them? What's his relationship with Manfroy? Does he even know what he's being like set up to do? Some of that stuff is left ambiguous, like I said, but I think the best example of how ridiculously far the game will go to make sure you're never wondering about anything is in chapter 2. One of like some random NPC dude starts talking to Sigurd about some backstory, and it's talking about like Deirdre's mom was like with a like a person from Veltimer who is Arvis's father. And in my head at the time, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. They're kind of like dropping hints that Arvis is like the other person they need to complete their plan. And then two sentences later, they reveal it explicitly that that is exactly what they're trying to say. And then also, like one cutscene later, we know that Arvis is in on it and that Manfroy has told him everything. It's like it's again, they don't have to keep that stuff secret, but if they're going to withhold information from you, why is it the critical core building blocks of how the society in this game is structured? Why is it the fundamental mechanics by which the world is governed? Holy Blood is a big deal, and it's not like the characters don't know how it works. Everyone knows about the miracle at Darna. It's taught to children. At least like Seliph and stuff know about it. Most people don't realize that they're dragons, but that part, I mean, if we learned more about Darna at the beginning of the game, and then at the end it was revealed that they were dragons the whole time, that could be interesting. That would be like, whoa, this new information that we just got has put this other information that we've known the whole time in a new light. Instead, we're told about Darna, and then in the same cutscene, I'm pretty sure, told that they were all dragons. So we don't even have time for the information of what happened at Darna to sit with us and to, you know, for us to think about it and come to our own conclusions. It's just all given to us at once. There's multiple ways you could have made this better. I think, again, some of the big ones, obviously, take out the explicitness of Arvis being Sijin's son. Take out the cutscene between Sigurd and Deirdre that most people aren't even going to get anyway. Like, even if you want to make it like explicit for the audience but not the characters, you can do that. That's fine. Leave the cutscene of Manfroy explaining it in chapter 1 and just take out the conversation between Sigurd and Deirdre about it so that Sigurd has plausible deniability. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the long and short of it, is that the game both gives you too much information and not enough. It's like it makes an effort to conceal the wrong things, and I don't want to like speak with any sort of objectivity because I know people have different preferences on what they want in their stories, but this just seems like really weird on a mechanical level. Again, just kind of basic storytelling concepts of reveal information in a way that recontextualizes old information. Those ideas are completely non-existent here. You get it all revealed to you at once at the end with the Holy Blood stuff, or you get it all revealed to you at the beginning with the Arvis bullshit. So that's really my biggest problem with the game. There are a few smaller things. I've talked about like a lot of nitpicky stuff, like Bridget's situation not making a lot of sense, Altena's situation making, or Arion's situation not making a lot of sense, stuff like that. But that's all really minor stuff. I don't particularly care about tiny details like that. Even if like Arion's not really even a tiny detail, his conflict is an important part of the story in chapter 9, but it's not the hill I'm gonna die on, right? Like sometimes they just need conflict in the story and they need to come up with contrivances to make it happen. That's fine, I don't care. But the satisfaction of finding out pieces of information over the course of the game that are all brought together in the end with a final reveal, that we don't get that stuff, you know? Here's my hot take of the episode. I think that Gen 1 is only interesting because sad things happen to people, which is not even like a criticism, you know? Like a story can have its emotional weight hinge on tragedy, you know? That's fine. That's not a bad thing. But people are like, this game has an amazing story. It's so rich with detail and meaning, and it's so interesting and political, and I just don't see it at all. Like all the politicians, quote unquote, in this game are fucking evil mustache twirling villains. One of them literally has a monocle. One of them has a fucking monocle and says like, "We're going to frame Sigurd's father for murder," and then fucking the other guy comes in and he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna kill him with my big axe." You know, like those are the villains. This is not a highbrow fucking political commentary, right? And it doesn't have to be, but people talk about it like it is. I don't understand. It's fine for the story to just be like bad things happen to Sigurd and we feel bad for him and like that's emotionally satisfying, you know? Like that's fine. It's okay for the story to just be that. You don't need to hype it up as like this, this political drama that it really isn't. You know, like the closest it ever comes is chapter 2, which I've talked about like negatively in the past, and I actually think I've kind of come around on it more now. But in those past episodes, or I guess that's just that one past episode, I talk about how there's no intrigue there. The politicians and the lords and nobles and stuff are just like killing people for their own gain. That's not like, that is not high level political maneuvering. That's just greedy nobles being assholes. That's not like a unique concept, not even in the Fire Emblem series. That happens a lot. You look at characters like Desai from Echoes. Fucking Gaiden did Desai was originally in Gaiden. This game fucking didn't even do it first. Gaiden did it first. Gaiden did everything first. But yeah, or you want to talk about like actual interesting politics in Fire Emblem. Micallus in Fire Emblem 1 and 11 is great because he's a born leader and he uses his charisma and his talents and his leadership skills to lead his people into a conflict that ends up killing a lot of them for like a cause that is very unjust. And like Minerva has to struggle with the fact that yes, like he is a better leader and a better ruler of our country than I am, but he is doing the wrong thing, and so I need to take this power away from him, even though he's the one who would like use it best if he would just stop being an asshole. That is a great story of both political intrigue and also like family drama kind of, and it's a great commentary on Minerva's character, and it's fantastic. This game doesn't have anything like that. This game doesn't have but at best it has like Tiltu and Lex and Azel having to come to terms with the fact that their family members are evil and they have to like kill them. But they don't really do anything interesting with that. Azel and Lex have a conversation where Azel's like, "Yo, dude, you just killed your dad. Are you all right?" And Lex is like, "Yeah, it's fine, whatever. I didn't really like him that much anyway." Like it's not Tiltu's focus on being Reptor's daughter is more so in the context of her not being liked by other people, which may not even be true for that matter. That might just her being like paranoid. So that's not even like interesting in that sense because she's probably wrong anyway. The emotional weight of Gen 1 is that tragedy after tragedy befalls our heroes who are just trying to do the right thing and cannot catch a break. That is fine. That is totally okay to base an entire story around, and it works. Sigurd is a great character because you sympathize with him, and you're like, holy shit, he is a good dude just trying to do what he thinks is right, and the world is just dicking him over and over and over again, and that's a bummer, and you feel bad for him, and that's why he works as a character. I talked about this in a previous episode. I don't remember which one it was, but I said I think the only reason people like Sigurd is because bad things happen to him, and I kind of framed that as being a negative, which I did think at the time, but I stopped to think about it for a while, and I was like, yeah, well, even if that's true, who cares? It's still good. It's still good writing, like, and I think that that's fine. I think that Sigurd's a great character, and I have kind of struggled with why I liked him so much in the past, but I think that that was really the missing link. Like the idea that just because a character is interesting because of things that happen to them, like the fact that that can still be good, like that can still be good writing, you know? And it is. Gen 1 is a good story, at least like after chapter 3 or chapter 3 and onwards, I think is really when it starts to pick up. Chapter 1, like prologue, I almost called it chapter 0. Prologue and then chapters 1 and 2 are mostly just setup, which is fine. Um, I think that they would be great if they just left things ambiguous, if they left stuff about Arvis unsaid, or if they kept some of the villain's motivations secret. Things like that. And then chapter 3 onward is really when the domino effect starts to fall of like, well, Elvegon gets turned against Sigurd, and then Solis gets taken over, and Lewin's friends die, and then chapter 5 is them finally, marching on their homeland. A lot of their friends and family members are dying. Like the fact that the first 3 chapters are just set up is fine. I just wish that they set up mysteries. If they're not going to do anything with those first 3 chapters, then you gotta like have intrigue and motivation. Otherwise, it's just like, okay, well, Sigurd did this, and then Sigurd did that, and then Sigurd did this, and then it's only after chapter 3 that things start to actually fall into place to make that stuff satisfying. I don't know. Maybe I'm not making any sense, but this is kind of like how I feel about the whole thing. Um, Gen 1 is a good story. It just takes a while to get going, and it is not nearly as nuanced or well thought out as people seem to think it is. And I'm not trying to shit on it. I think that this is fine. I don't think that Kaga's even a bad writer. I think he does a great job. I mean, I even complimented stuff with Minerva, although I don't know how much of that was FE11 invention. But I think Gaiden and Echoes have some cool stuff going on there, and Thracia has a lot of great political stuff from what I remember, although I could be wrong, just like I was about this game. I don't know. But yeah, I really don't want this to be taken as I don't like Gen 1's story, because I do. I also like Sigurd a lot as a protagonist, and I like Lewin, and I like Finn and Quan and all those guys. They're all great. They're all good. I just think that people need to calm down and just let them be what they are, which is good, well written, but relatively simple characters that are just emotionally potent because you feel bad for them, you know? And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you can come up with like uh, comebacks or counter arguments for a lot of what I'm saying here. I don't want to state my opinion as fact, but that's just how I feel. And then we move into Gen 2, which is generally regarded as the much, much weaker half of the game, and I can see why. I think that Gen 2 succeeds on a lot of smaller things. The setup of Chapter 6 is good. It really introduces a lot of concepts that are going to be relevant throughout the game, which I don't think that prologue really does. Stuff like Sigurd not only left you items and holy blood, but he also left you bonds and meaningful relationships, and that's how he ends up with people like Oifi and of course like Fee and Leaf. All these people join him because of his father's legacy, and that's a concept that's set up in chapter 6. Also set up in chapter 6 is everyone's talking about how fucking awful and terrible Isaac is, and no one likes living there. Everyone's like, this is the worst thing I've ever had to experience in my life. Please kill me now because Isaac is just such a terrible place to live. And then Lewin comes back and is like, yeah, I mean, Isaac's bad, all right, but there are places that are way, way, way worse. At least Isaac, they aren't like hunting children for sport. That is happening in other places. So Isaac kind of has it lucky. That's a I mean, I don't really want to call it subtle, but they don't like draw specific attention to it. That's just a detail that I picked up on that's like, huh, if that's intentional, then that's really clever because it's kind of it's broadening Selif's horizons to like, yeah, your world up to this point has been pretty bad, but it can get way, way, way worse, and it will before long. So I also think that Gen 2 has a lot of characters that really come into their own. Shannon and Oifi are good characters in Gen 1, but in Gen 2 they really get fleshed out and they feel much more like three-dimensional characters. I mean, none of these characters are really three-dimensional, but characters that have like lingering regrets, and this is more like later on in the gen obviously, but they're not just cardboard cutouts. You get a sense of their relationships with Seliph, and you can fill in the blanks on a lot of them, but you still get enough of a vibe where you can be like, oh yeah, so like Shannon's kind of like an older brother figure to him, and if he's like a dad. I do think that Gen 1 is probably better overall, probably by like a lot, because after Chapter 7, things kind of start to fall apart. Ares is fucking awful. I've gone on a full rant about him in honestly like multiple past episodes, but especially in episode 8. I like went off on him, but it's fine. Chapter 8 and 9 kind of feel like filler, although Trevant is a great villain, and I like what they do with him. Some of the stuff in Thracia is really good, but for the most part, chapters 8 and 9 aren't all that special. Chapter 10 is kind of confused on what the fuck it wants to do with Arvis. It's not really confused on what it wants to do with Arvis, I just don't think it does Arvis justice. Ishtar is a little bit all over the place until the very end. Endgame, the villains are stupid idiots that, without any sort of like set up that this is what their characters are like. They let their one flaw in their plan run around and don't just kill her immediately. And then we get the lore dump about the Crusaders, and then the game is over, basically. The reveal. Oh, this is another thing. The reveal that Forseti is, or that Lewin is Forseti the whole time. That's a I mean, I want to call it a good example of like this is a mystery that's set up, except there wasn't really any mystery in the first place. It does recontextualize old events. It does make you think, okay, well, what part of his past actions are explained better now that we know that he was Forseti the whole time. And it leaves you with the question of, well, how much of him was actually Forseti? How much was Lewin? Are they kind of like the same thing now? Or are they like two distinct like entities residing in the same body? Stuff like that. It leaves a lot of room for interpretation. That's great. I think that overall this is like an 8 out of 10 reveal. The problem is that the earlier stuff doesn't really feel like it's setting up a mystery. It just feels like Lewin is being an asshole. It feels like Lewin has regressed as a character, which is fine. I like that. I like the idea that Lewin is like this character that cannot, for the life of him, make any meaningful changes in his life. I think that that's a great concept for a character, but it's not like you're wondering, man, why is Lewin acting like this? There's something weird going on. I wonder if something's up. It's just you're just like, oh, Lewin's just being stupid, or something like that. That's kind of how I felt about it, at least. Maybe I mean, there's room for like interpretation or room for argument, I guess, on like when you first meet him in Gen 2, it's like he said he was going to turn over a new leaf, but he didn't. Why? What has he been doing this whole time? Where did he meet Julia? What is like where does he go in chapter 6? There's some stuff that you are kind of left wondering about. So I think it's a good reveal overall. I just think that it doesn't really feel like it's answering a question that people had. Instead, it's just kind of coming in out of left field and making you be like, "Oh, okay. So that's a new way to look at it." But it doesn't really answer any questions that I had. You know what I mean? It's still good though. I'm not gonna say that that's a bad reveal because I think it's excellent. I just think that they could have gone a little bit further with it to make it more satisfying to get that explanation, you know? And finally, before we wrap up here and start talking about Thracia, I want to talk about Seliph because, god damn it, I am sorry, Seliph. I did not think that you were going to be a good character. I've always kind of felt like Seliph was the, it's like that meme where it's like we have Sigurd at home, Seliph, or the one with the yearbook where it's like uh Seliph, the cooler Seliph. He's always felt like the weak link in the FE12 or FE12, FE4 Lord duo. He's felt a lot more milquetoast, a lot less interesting, and barely even felt like a character from my past recollections of this game and the general consensus of people in the fandom. There are definitely people who like Seliph, but I think the general agreement is that he's pretty good, but not like anything to write home about. He's perfectly serviceable, kind of like Roy. Roy also has some stands, although that might be more so because of Super Smash Brothers. I don't know. And I just have to say, I am very sorry, Seliph, because I could not have been more wrong. I love Seliph in this game. I think that he is definitely a lot blander and a lot more milquetoast than other lords in the series, especially like Sigurd. But if you look at the kind of like quote unquote bland lords that people talk about and people kind of say are lame or forgettable, you get characters like Roy, like I said, or Lynn, Erica, usually the girls, unfortunately. But Micaiah, I think, is not as well liked. Marth, even, I think people kind of talk about even Eliwood, to be honest. You know, and I don't remember all those characters very well, and I'm almost certain that I'm gonna go through their stories and have like a moment like this where I'm like, damn, this character is a lot better than I gave them credit for. But based on my thoughts right now, Seliph is like that concept, like a traditional fantasy lord type character, like a do good character, but done excellently. He's not like bland. He has a personality. It's just a little bit generic, but it's very fleshed out and it's very consistent, and you can see his thought process in a lot of different areas. He's very, very humble to the point of being almost down on himself. And he gives a lot of people credit for things that, I mean, not even necessarily that he does, but he doesn't often take credit where it would be like reasonable for him to take it. He's very focused on how other people are going to help him. He cares about his friends, but he's also willing to make sacrifices when he needs to, as shown in chapter 7, when Lewin is like, hey, we might lose people on our way to get the shrine. And he's like, yeah, you're probably right, but we got to do it anyway. He's incredibly down to earth, has a wonderful relationship with Oifi and Shannon, is incredibly proud of his father and trying to live up to his legacy in a way that I think Leaf is honestly, Leaf and Seliph have that in common too, where both of their fathers have, if you want to look at it at the face of it, pretty questionable ideologies. Well, Sigurd doesn't really have a questionable ideology. He just kind of does some kind of messed up shit, whereas Quan kind of has a questionable ideology. And they're both just like, yeah, man, our dads were so cool, perfect people. Um, I think the difference there is maybe that Sigurd's thoughts, at least I choose to interpret it this way. The fact that Sigurd invaded like 3 countries over the course of the game is looked at a little bit critically, I think. Like, there's no way it was unintentional that, people were like, wow, Granvale's really on a roll lately. They're taking over like countries left and right, and half of them were taken over by Sigurd. So that's got to be at least somewhat intentional. Quan, I think they just genuinely thought that what he was doing was super good and right, which has a lot of implications that we don't have to get into right now. I talked about him a little bit last episode, but I'm getting off topic. He has a good relationship with Leaf, just generally a great, great guy. And I loved seeing him just doing his thing. His moment with his parents in chapter 10 is not good. I've talked about that. That is like I've said Gen 1's still good. I just don't think it's as good as people say it is. I don't think that this is good at all. I think that the bullshit with the ghosts in chapter 10 is at best really cheesy, and I think at worst is just like fails to be emotionally resonant at all. There's nothing there that makes me be like, oh man, I'm really glad he got this last moment with his parents. They're just kind of like nagging him, kind of. It's kind of fucked up. But that's kind of why I came up with my own headcanon that like it's in his head, because as lame as that sounds, it fits with his character really well. It's all stuff that he already thinks about himself, and he isn't being challenged on anything like I feel like, his parents would be challenging him on. If they wanted to do a teaching moment for Seliph at the very end, then have his parents challenge him on something that he doesn't already think. Whereas everything they say to him is stuff that he already believes, and they never say that they're proud of him because he is the type of person that does not have like he does not feel like he needs to be rewarded with the pride and the acceptance and approval of others. He's just doing it because he feels like it's the right thing to do. So the fact that they don't say anything like praise him at all totally fits if it's in his own head. I've talked about this in chapter 10 episode, so I'm not going to get too far into it here. Because I really like that interpretation. It makes the scene work a lot better for me because otherwise it just doesn't make any sense. I don't know why Sigurd and Deirdre would like completely fucking ignore him basically. Like anytime he's like, I avenged dad, I killed Arvis, are you happy? And they're just like, whatever. You make sure that you stay humble or whatever. Like that just feels like they're just kind of being assholes, aren't they? Like I don't know. Anyway, that moment didn't really do anything for me. But otherwise, I think that the story does him good. Seliph is a good character, and I regret that I have not been. I regret being so hard on him because I've kind of bought into the general idea that if a character is not like ha ha funny beat 'em up man like Hector or Ike, or if he's not like I'm gonna go fight the CEO of racism, like again Ike or Claude even, or isn't like I'm gonna go commit war crimes like Dimitri and Edelgard. You know, like it is possible to have a character that is just simple, straightforward, a little bit cliche, but very, very well done, and that is what Seliph is. And I definitely think that if you are one of those people who think that Seliph isn't a good character because he's a little bland, go back and read some of his dialogue, and you might get a new appreciation for him. I know that I did. So, believe it or not, I'm only like an hour in probably when this gets slimmed down, but I'm already pretty much done. I didn't really have as much to say as I thought I was going to, and this is maybe my lesson that I should make this into a longer version of like the end game episode or something. I don't know. We'll see how I decide to do this going forward. I mean, it's not like an hour is like a short. I think the chapter 8 episode was only like 45 minutes, so it's fine to have an episode that's this short. I just thought it would be longer. Overall, I like this game very much. I would probably, if you put a gun to my head, like before I did this, probably would have put it in my top five. I don't think it's there anymore. I think that my overall kind of like disappointment with the maps, as well as the story kind of taking a while to get going, holds it back in my opinion. I don't, I'm not gonna do like a full ranking. Maybe at the end of this, if I get through all the games, I'll like rank them all or something. But for the most part, I just kind of want to give my general vibe, and this is probably it's still like up there, definitely in the top half of games for me, but probably not quite in my top five anymore. I would just give you my top five right now, but I kind of want to save my favorite game as kind of like a surprise. for when we get there. I want to see if you guys can guess what it is as we get closer. I might let a couple hints slip through. But if you think you can take a crack at it, let me know what you think my favorite game in the series is. Have I said it before? I don't think so. I'm pretty sure I haven't mentioned it. So next time we are going to be doing the first few chapters of Thracia 776. I don't know exactly how many chapters I'm going to do. My thought was, and I'll play them and see if this is reasonable or if I need to cut it down a little bit. My idea was going to be I play the first four chapters, so 1, 2, 2x, and 3, which will get us right up to Manster. I'm not 100% sure, but that's my goal right now is to play all the pre-Manster chapters. We are going to be playing on Paragon mode, which I'll talk a little bit more about next. I mean, I already talked about it a little bit this episode, but I'll talk about why I'm doing that when we actually start Thracia. But I just wanted you guys to know that I am planning on playing on Paragon mode, and I thought it'd be fun if I let you guys kind of give me suggestions on who to use. Especially Thracia is definitely the game in the series that I'm the least familiar with. So I definitely haven't used all the characters. I haven't even used most of them. So I'd be interested to try out a few of your guys' favorites. I'm not gonna like make it into a poll or anything. Just if you feel like it, leave a tweet or an email. Again, the Twitter and the email are going to be in the description. Giving me suggestions on who to use, and maybe if I like your idea enough, I will try them out. So until then, though, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Go and play Fire Emblem 4 if you haven't. It's a very good game. I know I kind of talked shit about it, but I think it's because this game gets talked up as being like the best game in the series, and I kind of wanted to be like, well, I don't know about all that, but it is still quite good. But regardless, I will see you all next time. Bye bye.